When I first laid eyes on my daughter-in-law in that corner of my living room, I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about my family would shatter. There she stood, arms crossed, eyes slightly avoiding mine, her lips tight like a secret she'd been carrying for far too long. I should have seen it earlier, that change in her, but I was too busy with the rhythm of everyday life to notice the silent distance growing between us. It all started innocently enough. She'd been quieter than usual, withdrawing into herself when she used to share everything with me. There was a time when she'd come over for coffee every Tuesday morning, and we'd sit at my kitchen table, talking about everything, her work, the kids, how she was feeling. But lately? Well, lately, I didn't know where that woman had gone. The woman I'd once treated like my own daughter had become a stranger in my own home. And there it was, that moment. That look in her eyes when she finally spoke, the words that felt like a slap across my face. "You don't know everything about our family, do you? It wasn't always like this." I remember when Rachel first came into my life. My son, Thomas, was over the moon when he introduced her to me. She had that nervous smile, the one you get when you're trying to make a good first impression, but she was kind and warm. At first, I thought she was shy. Maybe a bit too reserved for my liking, but I chalked it up to being new to our family. I'd raised Thomas, after all, and had seen enough of life's twists and turns to understand that people need time to settle in. We had dinner together a lot in the early days of their marriage. I'd make my famous spaghetti, Thomas's favorite, and we'd sit around the table laughing about old memories, sharing stories about how the world had changed. Rachel fit in, just like I thought she would. But as the months passed, something shifted. I remember the day Thomas got his promotion. It was a big deal, and he was on cloud nine. We had a celebration, of course, and Rachel seemed happy for him. But there was this moment, this tiny, fleeting moment, when she excused herself from the table early, her face unreadable. It was the first time I really saw her pull away from all of us. At the time, I thought it was nothing. Maybe she was just tired. But it didn't stop there. The visits became less frequent. The phone calls, too. Whenever she did come over, she was distant. She would smile, but it never reached her eyes. I tried not to notice it, though. I didn't want to make her feel uncomfortable. She had her own life, after all, and maybe I was just being too clingy. It's not easy being a mother-in-law. I wanted to be supportive, give her space to breathe, but something didn't feel right. And then, of course, there was that moment, the moment I couldn't ignore. I had made plans for the two of us to go shopping. Just the two of us, like old times. I thought it might be a good opportunity to talk, to reconnect. But when I called to confirm, her voice was tight, almost curt. "I'm busy today, Mom. Can we reschedule?" It was the way she said it that made me pause. I had known Rachel for years, and never once had she called me Mom so coldly. It was always Mama or just Sue when she was feeling formal, but this felt wrong. The knot in my stomach grew. The next few weeks were a blur. I saw Rachel only at family gatherings, and even then, she seemed to keep to herself. She was polite, yes, but distant. She didn't laugh at the same jokes, didn't join in the same conversations. I tried to write it off. People change, don't they? Maybe she was just going through something personal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. One afternoon, I was at my son's house, picking up some laundry. I wasn't expecting Rachel to be home, but I still knocked and walked in. The door was slightly ajar, and I heard the faint sound of voices. At first, I thought it was just the TV, but then I realized it was coming from the hallway, from Rachel's bedroom. I stood there for a moment, frozen. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a conversation, but not a normal one. The low murmurs, the tension, it was all there. I pushed the door open a little further, just enough to peek inside. Rachel was sitting on the edge of the bed, her back to me. She was on the phone, speaking softly, but the words were clear enough to make my stomach drop. "I know it's not right. But I can't just tell them yet. They'll never understand." I stepped back, heart pounding. The phone call ended abruptly, and Rachel stood up quickly, pacing back and forth. Her eyes caught the door, and I could see the panic in her face as she scrambled to compose herself. "Mom," she said, her voice shaky, "I didn't hear you come in." But I couldn't speak. Not yet. Something told me to wait, to listen. The silence between us felt heavy, like there was something unsaid, something lurking just beneath the surface. I excused myself, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked out the door, I knew something was off. And I was going to find out what it was. The next few days felt like a slow unraveling. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something, something important. My mind raced with all the possible explanations. Maybe it wasn't what I thought. Maybe I had overheard wrong. But the more I tried to tell myself that, the more my gut twisted in protest. There was something hidden in the air, something Rachel wasn't telling me. I had to confront her. But how? What if I was wrong? What if I was just being an overbearing mother-in-law? The opportunity came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday afternoon when I decided to pay a surprise visit. I had told myself that I'd just drop by for a casual chat, nothing too serious. I told myself it was just a mother-in-law's intuition, a mother's love for her son, and that I was only concerned about Rachel's well-being. But deep down, I knew I couldn't ignore the gut feeling anymore. I knocked, and the door opened almost immediately. Rachel stood there, her face soft, yet there was something guarded in her eyes. She smiled, but it wasn't the warm smile I remembered from our earlier years together. It was polite, measured. Still, I smiled back, and we exchanged pleasantries. I could see the hesitance in her movements, the way she lingered just a little too long by the door, as though unsure whether or not to let me in. But eventually, she did. We sat on the couch. The conversation started out mundane, small talk, the weather, the kids. But I could tell she was tense. Her shoulders were tight, her hands twisting in her lap. I was being careful not to push too hard, not to make her feel trapped. But I had to know. "Rachel," I said, my voice gentle, but with a firmness I didn't recognize in myself. "Is everything all right? You've been so distant lately. I'm worried about you." She hesitated. Her eyes darted to the floor, then back to mine. There was a moment, just a brief moment, where I thought she might brush it off, pretend like nothing was wrong. But instead, she took a deep breath, almost as if steeling herself for something. "Actually, Mom," she started, and the use of the word mom again stung, like an unspoken acknowledgement of something deeper between us, something unfamiliar. "There's something I need to tell you." Her voice quivered as she spoke, and that's when I knew, this wasn't just a passing issue. This was something bigger, something that had been buried under layers of silence. "I've been keeping something from you," she continued, the words slow and deliberate. "It's about the family. About Thomas." I sat back, my heart thudding in my chest. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my head, but I kept my face calm, my hands steady. I wanted to reach out to her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But I couldn't. I needed to hear what she was going to say. "Rachel." Took another deep breath, and then the words spilled out, like they had been waiting for years to escape. "It's not just about the family, Sue," she said, her voice cracking. "It's about me. And it's about the secret I've been keeping. The one that's been eating me alive." I leaned in, urging her to continue. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever, and then she finally spoke, her voice so low that I could barely hear her. "I've been married before," she whispered. "Before I met Thomas. And I never told him. I didn't tell anyone." The room went still. My mind couldn't process it immediately. My first reaction was to laugh, to dismiss it as some sort of strange joke. But it wasn't. This was real. This was happening. "You're married." "Before?" I managed to whisper, my voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell Thomas? Why didn't you tell me?" Rachel's eyes welled up, and she wiped a tear from her cheek. "I was scared, Sue. I was terrified. My first marriage was. It wasn't good. It was abusive. I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. When I met Thomas, I thought everything would be different. I thought maybe this could be my fresh start. But I never knew how to tell him, how to bring it up without losing him." My heart sank as the weight of her words settled in. The pain in her eyes was undeniable, but it was also mixed with guilt. She had hidden this part of her life from everyone, including Thomas, the man she'd chosen to marry, the man I had watched fall in love with her. "And now," Rachel continued, "it's getting harder to keep the secret. The memories from my first marriage. They haunt me. But there's something else, Sue." She paused, and I felt the air grow even heavier between us. "I'm pregnant, Sue. And it's not Thomas's baby." I could barely breathe. The world around me seemed to blur, and for a moment, I thought I might pass out. My thoughts whirled, and I felt as though I had just been punched in the gut. Rachel wasn't just hiding her past, she was hiding something that would change everything. I didn't know what to say. My mouth went dry, and all I could do was stare at her, trying to process the weight of her confession. Betrayal didn't even begin to cover it. "Who is it, Rachel?" I managed to croak. My voice was barely a whisper. She looked down, ashamed. "It's my ex-husband's. I never told anyone, Sue. I didn't want anyone to know what happened. And now I don't know how to fix it." I don't remember how I got to my feet, but suddenly I was standing, pacing in the living room, trying to make sense of it all. The silence between us was unbearable, thick with tension, regret, and shock. Rachel just sat there, her hands twisted tightly in her lap, her eyes not meeting mine anymore. She had confessed, but the weight of her secret was still hanging over us both, suffocating the air. I felt like I had been hit by a truck. My son, Thomas, my baby boy, my pride and joy, was about to become the last to know the truth. His wife, the woman he had chosen to spend his life with, had carried this dark secret for years. And now, this, a child that wasn't his? It was too much. It was too much for me to process. I stopped pacing and turned to face Rachel. The anger that I had been holding back exploded in me, but it wasn't just anger. It was hurt, confusion, and a deep, aching sadness. "You've been hiding this from him?" I asked, my voice cracking. "From me? From all of us?" Rachel stood up slowly, her face crumpling with the weight of her own shame. "I didn't want to lose him, Sue. I love him so much," I thought. I thought if I just kept quiet, it would be easier. But now it's tearing me apart. I can't hold this in anymore. I walked toward her, my hands shaking, and for the first time, I saw the girl I had once considered a daughter. There was vulnerability in her eyes, but there was also something darker, something that had been festering for far too long. I could see the pain she was in, but I couldn't ignore the betrayal. The lies she had woven had been wrapped around this family like a noose, and I was about to witness it all unravel. "Don't you think Thomas deserves to know the truth?" I asked, my voice trembling with emotion. "Don't you think we deserve to know? He's your husband, Rachel. You married him, you promised him your truth, your honesty, and this. This is what you've kept from him?" I know, she whispered, her face pale, tears running down her cheeks. I was scared. I didn't know how to tell him. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought if I just kept going, it would all be okay. But now I'm just lost. I took a deep breath and held it for a moment. My heart hurt, for her, for Thomas, for everything that had been built on this shaky foundation of secrets and half-truths. I had spent years watching my son build his life, believing that everything was right, that everything was as it should be. And now, all of that was in jeopardy. The walls of our family, which had once felt so strong, were crumbling. I need to tell him, I said, my voice firm. There was no more room for hesitation. I'll tell him, Rachel. I won't let this go on anymore. But you're going to have to face him too. You can't keep running from this. It's time for the truth to come out. Rachel's face crumbled. I'm sorry, Sue. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to get this far. I shook my head. Sorry won't fix this. The damage is already done. The anger and sadness that had been swirling inside me now began to settle into a cold determination. I couldn't just sit back and let this fester any longer. I had to protect my son. I had to make sure that Thomas knew everything, even if it broke him. I wasn't going to let this lie continue. It was 3 days before I finally told Thomas. It wasn't easy, and in some ways, it felt like I was betraying him too. But I knew, deep in my heart, that he deserved the truth. No matter how much it hurt, no matter how much it tore this family apart. He had to know what Rachel had been hiding. I waited until he came over to visit. I made dinner, the same way I always did, hoping that somehow, the normalcy of it all would make this conversation easier. But deep down, I knew there was no easy way to tell him this. When he walked in, I saw the familiar grin on his face, the one that always made me feel like everything was right in the world. But it was fleeting. The smile faded the moment he saw the look on my face. He could tell something was wrong. He always could. Mom, what's going on? His voice was cautious, but his eyes searched mine for answers. I took a deep breath and sat down. Thomas, we need to talk. He sat across from me, his brow furrowed. I could tell he was already bracing himself for something bad. What is it, Mom? I glanced over at Rachel, who was sitting silently by the door, looking smaller than I had ever seen her. She was the one who needed to speak next. This was her secret, her betrayal. I nodded toward Rachel, and for a moment, it felt like the entire room held its breath. The weight of the truth was about to hit him like a freight train. Rachel looked at Thomas, her face pale and tear-streaked. Thomas, she whispered, her voice barely audible, I need to tell you something. There's something I should have told you a long time ago. Thomas's expression changed from concern to confusion. What are you talking about, Rachel? I'm not carrying your child, she said, her voice shaking. The baby. It's my ex-husband's. The room went still. Thomas didn't move, didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. His face drained of color, and I could see his mind racing, trying to make sense of what Rachel had just said. His breath caught in his throat, and for the first time, I saw the heartbreak in his eyes. You're lying, right? He asked, his voice raw with disbelief. No, Thomas, Rachel replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, but I couldn't hide it anymore. I could see the devastation in my son's eyes. His entire world was crumbling in front of him, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. Thomas stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back as he did. His eyes were wild, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I could feel the room tightening around me, suffocating us both in the aftermath of Rachel's confession. He looked at Rachel, his face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and betrayal, then back at me, searching for answers. I don't understand, Thomas said, his voice a low, almost desperate whisper. How could you? Why didn't you tell me? Rachel's face crumpled further. She reached out to him, but he stepped back, a reflex of pain, of wanting to protect himself from the truth that had come crashing down on him. I didn't know how, she stammered. I thought I could make it work. I thought I could leave it in the past, but I didn't want to lose you, Thomas. Lose me? His voice rose with each word, his eyes starting to glisten with tears. You think lying to me, keeping this from me for years, was how you were going to keep me? I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, the way his mind was trying to reconcile everything that had been built over the years. He had built his life, his future, on a foundation that now felt like it was crumbling to dust. I'm so sorry, Rachel cried, her voice breaking. I never meant to hurt you. I thought if I just kept quiet, everything would be okay. Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned and walked toward the window, staring out at the street below, the silence between us becoming unbearable. I wanted to go to him, to comfort him, but I knew that nothing I could say would make this easier. I need some time, Thomas said finally, his voice rough with emotion. I can't deal with this right now. Rachel stood frozen, her tears falling freely now, her hands trembling at her sides. Please don't leave me, Thomas. I love you. I've always loved you. Thomas didn't look at her. Instead, he walked toward the door, his hands clenched into fists by his sides. I wanted to stop him, to say something that would make this right, but I couldn't. The truth had been laid bare, and there was no going back from it. I'll be back later, he said, his voice hollow. But I need space. I need time to think. As the door closed behind him, the weight of the silence in the room almost felt physical, like an invisible pressure pressing against my chest. I turned to Rachel, who was sitting on the edge of the couch, her face buried in her hands. The tears kept falling, her shoulders shaking with each sob. Rachel, I said softly, walking over to her, this isn't easy. You've broken his heart, but you've also broken something else. You've broken the trust that was built between this family. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with guilt and regret. I know, Sue. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. But I couldn't keep pretending. I thought I could, but I can't. It's too much. I reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. You can't undo what's been done, but you can choose what comes next. You need to tell him the full truth, Rachel. You need to let him know why you kept this from him. And then you need to let him decide what he wants. But you can't keep hiding from this anymore. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and for a moment, I saw the young woman I had once taken into my home, the girl who had walked into my life with promises of love and a fresh start. I had hoped she would be the one to bring joy to my son's life, not heartbreak. But it wasn't just Rachel who had broken Thomas. It was this whole web of secrets they'd both been living in, secrets that were now exposed. The days that followed felt like an emotional fog. I had hoped that the truth would bring some clarity, but instead, it only seemed to cloud things further. Thomas barely spoke to anyone, retreating into himself, shutting out the world. He went to work, but even that seemed to lose its meaning. Rachel tried to reach out to him, but he wouldn't answer her calls or texts. She was left alone, too, in the aftermath of her own choices. The truth was now known. The family secret had been exposed, and there was no way to put it back in the box. Everyone in the family knew, and the news spread faster than I had expected. It was hard to look at Thomas without seeing the hurt that was etched into his features. And it was just as hard to look at Rachel, who was living with the consequences of her choices. She hadn't meant for it to go this far, but now, nothing would ever be the same. It wasn't just Thomas who had to process the truth. We all did. Rachel's parents, my friends, everyone who had once seen them as the perfect couple now had to contend with the reality of what had been hidden for so long. The whispers started, the questions, the judgment. Some people were sympathetic, others couldn't understand how she could have kept such a thing from her husband. The moral consequences were unavoidable. It wasn't long before Rachel came to me, asking for advice. She had no idea what to do, where to turn. I could see the raw pain in her eyes, the brokenness that mirrored my own. But even as she sat there, her hands trembling, I couldn't offer her the comfort I wanted to. This wasn't something I could fix. This was something Thomas had to fix. And even though he loved her, I wasn't sure how much of his heart he could still give her after everything. But I told her one thing that I believed with all my heart: you can't keep waiting for him to forgive you. You have to give him the space to decide. You've hurt him, Rachel. Now you have to give him the time to heal. She nodded, but the doubt in her eyes lingered. Weeks passed before Thomas finally spoke to me again. We sat in the same living room where I had once held his tiny hands, where he had grown from a boy into the man sitting across from me now, torn apart by his own heart. I had hoped that with time, the healing would begin, but the wound was still fresh. It wasn't just Rachel's betrayal, it was the trust that had been shattered between us all. "I'm trying, Mom," Thomas said quietly, his voice hoarse. "I'm trying to make sense of everything. But it's hard." "I know it is," I said, my voice soft. "But you have to decide what you want from this. What you want from her. And what you want for yourself." He looked at me, his eyes tired but determined. "I don't know yet. But I need time to figure it out." And so, the healing began. Slowly. For Thomas, for Rachel, and for all of us. Over time, things began to settle into a new rhythm. It wasn't easy. The road to forgiveness, to healing, is never straight. But I could see that both Thomas and Rachel were trying. Slowly, piece by piece, they were rebuilding their lives, their marriage. And in the quiet moments, when the world outside seemed to pause, I could hear the small sounds of hope, the sound of them talking, of Rachel apologizing again, of Thomas trying to understand. As the days passed, the weight of the truth began to shift, ever so slowly, from pure devastation into something more manageable. It was as if the heaviness that had sat in the pit of my stomach for so long was finally beginning to lift. But it wasn't easy, not by any means. Thomas was still struggling. He had good days and bad days. Sometimes, he'd talk to me, letting me in on his thoughts, his confusion. Other times, he'd retreat, closing himself off from everyone, including Rachel. But I noticed something in those quiet moments of his: he wasn't giving up. Not entirely. He was fighting through the pain, even if he didn't always know what the next step looked like. Rachel, too, was trying. I could see it in her eyes, the deep regret that hadn't left her. She was doing her best to be there for Thomas, trying to rebuild the trust she had shattered. She spent hours at the kitchen table, writing letters to him, apologizing, explaining herself, trying to show him how much she loved him, how much she regretted the choices she had made. It was clear that she wanted to fix things, but there was a sadness in her that I couldn't ignore. She knew, as well as I did, that nothing could ever be the same again. But forgiveness isn't a light switch you can just flip. It takes time. And I wasn't sure when Thomas would find it in his heart to forgive her completely, if he ever would. But one thing I knew for sure: Rachel was committed to showing him that she was sorry, that she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. One evening, I sat on the porch, sipping my tea, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe without that knot in my chest. Thomas was inside, talking to Rachel. I had no idea what they were saying, but there was a different air about them, a kind of tenderness that I hadn't seen in weeks. Maybe, just maybe, they were finding their way back to each other. The sound of footsteps on the porch steps pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see Thomas standing there, his expression softer than I had seen it in days. He looked weary, but there was a sense of peace in his demeanor now. Not full peace, not yet, but something had shifted. He sat down beside me, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, letting the quiet settle around us. Finally, Thomas spoke. "I don't know if I can ever forget what happened, Mom. I don't know if I'll ever trust Rachel completely again. But I'm not ready to give up on her yet." I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my own heart. "That's all you can do, sweetheart. One step at a time. One day at a time." "I'm trying," he said, his voice soft, but there was strength in it too. "I'm trying to heal. And I'm trying to understand why she did what she did. I'm trying to find my way back to her." I smiled at him, proud of the man he was becoming, even in the face of so much heartbreak. "It's a long road. But you're not alone. You don't have to do it alone." He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, we sat in comfortable silence. Maybe the road to healing wasn't clear, but it was there. And I knew, deep down, that if they were both willing to fight for it, they could find their way back to each other. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I find myself wondering, how much of our lives are shaped by the choices we make, and how much is determined by the secrets we keep hidden. In the end, it wasn't the betrayal itself that was the hardest to bear. It was the years of silence, the years of pretending everything was fine when, deep down, something was wrong. But even in the darkest moments, there is a light, a chance for healing, for understanding, for starting over. Thomas and Rachel may never be the same, but they're learning to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. I've learned, too, that sometimes the hardest thing is letting go of the pain, forgiving what we can, and moving forward with open eyes. It's not about forgetting, it's about learning from what we've been through and finding a way to keep going, even when the path is uncertain. I ask you, my dear friends, have you ever been in a situation where you had to confront a painful truth? How did you handle it? Did you forgive, or did you walk away? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The weeks that followed were a slow, almost agonizing process. There was no quick fix. No sweeping gesture of forgiveness that would instantly make everything okay again. For Thomas and Rachel, it felt like every day was a test. And for me, it was hard to watch them struggle with something so painful, something that I couldn't help them solve, no matter how much I wanted to. One evening, about a month after Thomas had first learned the truth, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning up after dinner. The sounds of the house were familiar, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of dishes being stacked, the rustling of papers as Thomas scrolled through his work emails. It was almost peaceful, but there was something missing. Rachel hadn't been over for a few days. She was still staying at their house, but the distance between them felt wider now. I wasn't sure what was happening between them, but I could sense that Thomas was struggling to find his way back to her, even though he was trying. It wasn't just the betrayal that had hurt him, it was everything that had followed. The awkward silences, the failed attempts at normalcy, and, of course, the baby. That was the hardest pill for him to swallow, knowing that she was carrying someone else's child. A child that was part of a past she hadn't told him about until it was too late. I could see the toll it was taking on him. He was more withdrawn, more quiet, and his eyes seemed to have lost that spark they once had. But he was still my son, still the same boy who had once confided in me about his dreams, his hopes for the future. And he hadn't given up on Rachel. Not completely. A knock on the door broke my thoughts. I looked up, surprised. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Rachel standing there, her expression hesitant, almost apologetic. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, and she shifted from foot to foot, clearly unsure of what to say. "Hi, Sue," she said softly. Her voice had a tightness to it that spoke volumes. She hadn't been around much, and I could see the pain still etched on her face. But there was also something else, something raw, something vulnerable. "Come in," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "What's on your mind?" Rachel walked inside, glancing nervously toward the living room where Thomas had been sitting earlier. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice quivering slightly. I motioned for her to sit at the kitchen table, and I did the same, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. I wasn't sure what she was going to say, but I knew it was important. She'd been carrying the burden of her secret for so long, and it had only been getting heavier. I could see it in the way she moved, the way she spoke. She was holding something in, and I had a feeling I was about to find out what it was. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "About everything. About Thomas. About us." I nodded, waiting for her to continue. I wasn't sure what else there was to say, but I knew she needed to say it. "I don't know how to fix this, Sue," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "I feel like I've ruined everything. I've lost Thomas's trust. And I've lost myself, too." I reached across the table, placing a hand on hers. "You didn't just lose him, Rachel. You lost yourself, yes. But you have to understand, he's not just hurting because of what you did. He's hurting because of the way you kept this from him. He feels betrayed. He feels left out of your life." "I know," she said softly. I didn't want to lose him. I thought that if I kept this from him, I could protect him. I thought that I could keep him safe from the pain I had gone through. But now I see how much I've hurt him." "Have you told him everything?" I asked quietly. "Have you told him why you kept this from him?" Rachel swallowed hard, looking down at her hands. "No," she admitted. "I haven't. I don't even know how to explain it to him. How do I tell him that I was too scared to trust him with my past? That I thought he wouldn't love me if he knew?" "You have to be honest with him," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "You can't hide anymore, Rachel. You've already lost so much. But if you want to fix this, you have to give him the full truth. He's not going to be able to heal if you don't." Rachel nodded slowly, wiping away the tears that had fallen. "I'm scared, Sue. I'm scared that he'll never forgive me. That he'll leave me. That this will be the end of us." I squeezed her hand gently. "I can't tell you what he'll do, Rachel. But I know this, if you don't tell him the truth, if you keep hiding, you're never going to heal. And neither will he. You've both been carrying this weight alone for too long." She sat there for a moment, looking lost in thought, before finally standing up. "I need to go talk to him," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I have to do this. I can't keep running from it." "Do you want me to go with you?" I asked, standing up as well. "No," she replied softly, shaking her head. "This is something I have to do by myself." Later that evening, after Rachel left to speak with Thomas, I found myself pacing the house. I didn't know what was going to happen. Part of me wanted to believe that they could find a way back to each other, that love would be enough to heal the wounds that had been opened. But the other part of me, the part that had watched this all unfold, knew that it wasn't going to be that easy. Trust had been broken, and love, though a powerful force, couldn't just magically restore what had been shattered. But as I sat in the quiet of the house, waiting for Rachel and Thomas to return, I realized something. Healing wasn't a destination, it was a journey. And no matter how painful the road was, it was still a road worth traveling. The hardest part, I think, was knowing that there would be moments when they both would feel like giving up. But in those moments, they needed to remember why they started in the first place, why they loved each other. And I hoped that, in time, they would find their way back to that place. The next few days were filled with a quiet tension. I could sense the change in Thomas, the way he was looking at me, the way he would sometimes pause mid-sentence, as if he was still trying to work through everything Rachel had confessed. It wasn't that he was angry with me, no, I could tell he was still processing everything. He wasn't angry with her either. He was simply lost, caught between the man he thought he knew and the woman he had married. I had hoped that after their conversation, after Rachel spoke the full truth, things would begin to heal. But I had forgotten how much pain the truth can bring, how it can rip open old wounds and leave them raw and exposed, with no easy way to patch them up. I saw Rachel a few times in those following days. She looked like a woman who was walking through a fog, unsure of where to go, what to do. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she spoke less, her voice quieter. I knew that she was trying to make things right, but sometimes, the harder you try to fix something, the more it seems to slip out of your hands. On a Sunday afternoon, when the weather was particularly beautiful, I decided to take a walk. The day had a peaceful, almost surreal quality to it, and I needed the solitude. As I walked along the path near my house, I thought about everything that had happened. The family I had raised, the life I had built, it had all felt so solid. But now, it felt like the foundation was shaking, like everything I thought I knew about love and family was being questioned. And then I remembered something my mother used to tell me: sometimes the people you love most will hurt you the deepest, but that doesn't mean they don't love you too. It just means they're human. The words, simple as they were, settled into me like a stone in my chest. And for the first time in a while, I realized I wasn't just watching this unravel from the sidelines. I was part of it. I had been hurt too, by Rachel's secrets and her betrayal, but I also knew that in the end, we all needed to move forward. For Thomas, for Rachel, for the whole family, there needed to be healing, and that healing couldn't happen if we all stayed trapped in the past. As I walked back to my house, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Rachel. "I think Thomas is finally ready to talk," the message read. "He asked me to meet him at the park. I don't know what's going to happen, but I just wanted to let you know." I couldn't help the smile that tugged at my lips. It was a small step, a tentative one, but it was progress. I typed a quick reply: "Good luck, Rachel. You've got this." I didn't hear from her again for several hours. The suspense was unbearable. I didn't know what had happened at the park, but I knew Rachel had finally taken that crucial step, the one that so many of us shy away from when faced with the truth. She had been willing to face the consequences of her actions, to take responsibility, and to give Thomas the space he needed to decide what came next. That evening, around dinner time, Rachel showed up at my doorstep. Her face was more composed than I had seen it in days, but there was something about her that still felt fragile. She looked like she had fought through something, though, and I could see the determination in her eyes. "I need to tell you what happened," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Thomas. He didn't leave me. He didn't walk away." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? Did you two talk?" Rachel nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. "We talked for hours. It wasn't easy. It never is. But he said he's not ready to give up on us. He's willing to work through it, Sue. He said he loves me, and that he wants to try." I couldn't help the tears that came to my eyes. I wasn't sure what to say, but I could feel the weight of everything she had been carrying lift a little in that moment. The pain wasn't gone, not yet. But it was a step toward something better. Toward healing. "I'm glad," I said quietly. "I'm really glad, Rachel." We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other. There was still so much work to be done, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. maybe, just maybe, love could still win. In the weeks that followed, things began to shift, slowly but surely. Thomas and Rachel spent more time together, though their conversations were often tense. There was still a lot of unspoken pain between them, but they were trying. They were learning how to talk again, how to trust again, and how to navigate the complicated path that lay before them. For me, it wasn't easy either. I still had my doubts about Rachel, about how she had kept this secret for so long. But I had to accept that people make mistakes. And I had to trust that Thomas, my son, would make the decision that was right for him. I watched them with cautious optimism. I saw the way Thomas would reach out to Rachel when she seemed lost, the way Rachel would try to comfort him when she saw the pain still lingering in his eyes. They weren't the same couple they had been before. They couldn't be. But they were growing, learning, and slowly, the pieces of their relationship were being put back together. One evening, about 2 months after that painful conversation, Thomas came over for dinner. He wasn't as withdrawn as he had been before. He seemed lighter. Rachel was with him, and though they still had their awkward moments, there was a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. They weren't back to where they were, but they were on the road to getting there. As we sat down to eat, Thomas reached across the table and took Rachel's hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was meaningful. And for the first time I saw them both, not as a couple broken by betrayal, but as two people trying to rebuild what had been lost. "Thank you, Mom," Thomas said quietly, his eyes meeting mine. "I don't know where we're going, but I'm trying." "And Rachel?" "She's trying too." Rachel smiled at me, her eyes soft. "I know I hurt you, Sue. And I can't change that. But I'm so sorry for everything. I'm going to keep trying." And in that moment, I knew. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was enough. They were enough. Days turned into weeks, and those weeks began to soften the sharp edges of the pain. Thomas and Rachel, though still cautious with each other, seemed to have found a new rhythm in their relationship. It wasn't the carefree, joyful love they once had, but it was something else, something grounded, something real. And sometimes, that was all that mattered. I could see it in the small moments. When Thomas would gently brush a stray lock of hair from Rachel's face, when Rachel would offer him a warm smile that seemed to carry more weight than the ones she used to give. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened, it was about moving forward, together, one step at a time. They both sought counseling, individually and together. It wasn't a magic cure. There were still fights, still moments of doubt and insecurity. But each time they fell, they got back up. I was proud of them both. Proud of Thomas for being brave enough to confront his pain and not let it destroy him. Proud of Rachel for her vulnerability, for facing her past and sharing it with the man she loved, even when it meant tearing down the walls she had so carefully built. It wasn't easy. There were still awkward family dinners, still glances that passed between Thomas and Rachel, glances that spoke of everything they hadn't yet said, everything still hanging in the air between them. But as time wore on, those glances became less charged, less filled with unresolved pain. And more filled with understanding. It was a quiet Sunday morning, 3 months after the bombshell had dropped, when I got the call from Thomas. I had been sitting on the porch, enjoying the soft morning breeze, when my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number at first, but when I answered, I heard his voice on the other end, steady and warm. "Mom," he said, and there was a note of calm in his voice that I hadn't heard in a while. "Can we talk?" I sat up straighter, my heart giving a quick, hopeful flutter. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" He hesitated for just a moment before speaking again. "I'm not calling to talk about Rachel or the past. I want to tell you something." I could tell he was serious, and my heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "I'm going to propose to her," he said quietly. I'm going to ask her to marry me again. I know things aren't perfect. I know we've got a lot of healing to do, but I can't imagine my life without her. I want to make it right. I want to move forward with her. My breath caught in my chest. I felt a surge of emotion flood through me, joy, pride, relief, and even a little disbelief. They had come so far. They had fought through so much, and here he was, standing at the edge of a new beginning. Thomas, I'm so happy for you, I said, my voice cracking with emotion. You've both been through so much, but if you're ready to take that step, I know it'll be a beautiful one. You've got my support, always. He paused for a moment before continuing, his voice soft but filled with determination. I don't know what the future holds, Mom. But I know one thing, I love her. I want to build a future with her. And I'm ready to fight for that. I smiled through my tears, my heart swelling with pride for my son. He was a man now, not just in age but in the way he was handling this mess of a situation. He was choosing love, despite the pain, despite the uncertainty. And I couldn't have been prouder. It wasn't just Thomas and Rachel who had to navigate this new chapter. The rest of the family was still trying to come to terms with the revelations. My own relationship with Rachel had been strained, and there was still work to be done. But I could see the effort she was putting in, the sincerity in her every action. She wasn't just asking for forgiveness, she was earning it, slowly but surely. I spent more time with her, helping her navigate the complicated feelings she had toward her past and the future she was trying to rebuild with Thomas. It wasn't easy. Sometimes the words didn't come out the way she meant them, and I could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of being judged, of never being able to fully make up for the mistakes she'd made. But slowly, as she and I spent time together, I saw her start to change. She was becoming the person I had always hoped she could be. She wasn't perfect, but she was real. Thomas, too, spent more time with me. We took long walks together, sometimes talking, sometimes just walking in silence, letting the weight of everything settle into our bones. I could see that he wasn't the same man he had been before all of this happened. He was quieter, more introspective, but there was strength in his silence. He had learned to protect himself, but he hadn't shut himself off completely. There was a wisdom in him now that wasn't there before. And slowly, as time went on, I began to feel the shift in our family. It wasn't a dramatic change. It wasn't the kind of transformation you could see in a single moment. It was a gradual thing, a quiet understanding that no matter what happened, we were in this together. The past would always be part of us, but it didn't have to define us. We were creating a new story, a story that was still being written, still being worked on, but one that had the potential to be full of love and forgiveness. One evening, almost 6 months after that painful confrontation, Thomas and Rachel sat down with me for dinner. It had become a tradition of sorts, these family dinners where we shared not just food but our stories, our struggles, and our hopes. Rachel had become more comfortable with me, and the awkwardness was gone. We still had our moments, of course, but they were becoming less and less. Over dinner, Thomas turned to Rachel, his eyes filled with warmth. I've been thinking about how far we've come, he said softly, his hand reaching for hers across the table. I've seen the woman you'd become, Rachel. And I love you. I'm ready for the next chapter. Whatever it looks like. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she smiled through them. I'm ready too, Thomas. I've made so many mistakes, but I've learned so much. And I'm not going to stop trying. I love you, and I want to be with you for the rest of my life. And in that moment, I knew they had found something precious. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't easy. But it was real. And that was enough. I smiled, my heart full. I'm proud of both of you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. You've come a long way, and I know you're going to make it. Whatever happens, you'll have each other. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that has happened, the secrets, the pain, the healing, I can't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Sometimes we go through life believing that everything will stay the same, that our families will always be who they are. But the truth is, we all change. We all make mistakes. We all have things buried deep within us, things we don't want to face. But it's how we choose to handle those things that truly define us. I've learned that family isn't just about blood or shared memories. It's about love. And love isn't perfect. It isn't always clean. Sometimes, love is messy, broken, and full of scars. But if you're willing to face the truth, to forgive, and to move forward, love can be the thing that holds you together. I've watched my son and his wife, two people who had every reason to give up, find their way back to each other. Slowly, and with a lot of work, they've begun to rebuild. They've learned that trust isn't something you can just give back after it's been broken, but that doesn't mean it's impossible to rebuild. They've learned that forgiveness isn't just something you say. It's something you do every single day, with every choice you make. For me, this journey has been one of letting go. Letting go of the past, of the pain, of the expectations I had of what a perfect family should look like. Because perfection doesn't exist. But love does. And that's what matters in the end. As I sit here now, watching the sun set over the horizon, I realize that our family is stronger than it has ever been. Not because we're perfect, but because we've learned to face our truths, to accept each other for who we are, and to move forward with love in our hearts. So, I ask you, my dear friends, what would you do if the truth came knocking on your door? Would you face it, no matter how painful? Would you forgive the people you love? Would you fight for them, even when it seems impossible? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this story, if you found something that resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe for more stories of love, loss, and healing. Sometimes the hardest journeys are the ones that lead us home. Thank you for being a part of this journey with me. I'm grateful for each of you who have shared your time, your thoughts, and your hearts. Until next time. A footsteps on the porch steps pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see Thomas standing there, his expression softer than I had seen it in days. He looked weary, but there was a sense of peace in his demeanor now. Not full peace, not yet, but something had shifted. He sat down beside me, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. We just sat there, letting the quiet settle around us. Finally, Thomas spoke. I don't know if I can ever forget what happened, Mom. I don't know if I'll ever trust Rachel completely again. But I'm not ready to give up on her yet. I nodded, feeling a weight lift from my own heart. That's all you can do, sweetheart. One step at a time. One day at a time. I'm trying, he said, his voice soft, but there was strength in it too. I'm trying to heal. And I'm trying to understand why she did what she did. I'm trying to find my way back to her. I smiled at him, proud of the man he was becoming, even in the face of so much heartbreak. It's a long road. But you're not alone. You don't have to do it alone. He nodded, and for the first time in a long time, we sat in comfortable silence. Maybe the road to healing wasn't clear, but it was there. And I knew, deep down, that if they were both willing to fight for it, they could find their way back to each other. As I sit here, reflecting on everything that's happened, I find myself wondering, how much of our lives are shaped by the choices we make, and how much is determined by the secrets we keep hidden. In the end, it wasn't the betrayal itself that was the hardest to bear. It was the years of silence, the years of pretending everything was fine when, deep down, something was wrong. But even in the darkest moments, there is a light, a chance for healing, for understanding, for starting over. Thomas and Rachel may never be the same, but they're learning to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. I've learned, too, that sometimes the hardest thing is letting go of the pain, forgiving what we can, and moving forward with open eyes. It's not about forgetting, it's about learning from what we've been through and finding a way to keep going, even when the path is uncertain. I ask you, my dear friends, have you ever been in a situation where you had to confront a painful truth? How did you handle it? Did you forgive, or did you walk away? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. The weeks that followed were a slow, almost agonizing process. There was no quick fix. No sweeping gesture of forgiveness that would instantly make everything okay again. For Thomas and Rachel, it felt like every day was a test. And for me, it was hard to watch them struggle with something so painful, something that I couldn't help them solve, no matter how much I wanted to. One evening, about a month after Thomas had first learned the truth, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, cleaning up after dinner. The sounds of the house were familiar, the hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of dishes being stacked, the rustling of papers as Thomas scrolled through his work emails. It was almost peaceful, but there was something missing. Rachel hadn't been over for a few days. She was still staying at their house, but the distance between them felt wider now. I wasn't sure what was happening between them, but I could sense that Thomas was struggling to find his way back to her, even though he was trying. It wasn't just the betrayal that had hurt him, it was everything that had followed. The awkward silences, the failed attempts at normalcy, and, of course, the baby. That was the hardest pill for him to swallow, knowing that she was carrying someone else's child. A child that was part of a past she hadn't told him about until it was too late. I could see the toll it was taking on him. He was more withdrawn, more quiet, and his eyes seemed to have lost that spark they once had. But he